The autumn air in a Boston, Massachusetts park had the scent of dry leaves and the cheerful sound of children. Jenna, 17, a teenage babysitter with brown hair tied in a rush bun, was pushing an empty swing while the two children she was watching, Lily, 5, and Sam, 7, played in the sandbox. The golden afternoon seemed like a perfect picture, but suddenly a distortion appeared. A shadow, cold and heavy as ice, descended upon her. Jenna blinked, and the vibrant park turned gray. The children's laughter transformed into a muffled scream. She saw the red slide, bright under the sun, collapse with a sound of twisted steel. Panic took hold of her. Tiny bodies were crushed beneath the wreckage. The sound of the fall reverberated in her ears, an echo of something that had not yet happened. The vision dissipated as quickly as it appeared, leaving Jenna breathless. The real world returned in vibrant colors, but the feeling of horror persisted, an echo in her soul. Lily, in her plaid dress, approached, a bucket of sand in her hand. "Jenna, why do you look like that?" she asked, tilting her head. Jenna barely heard her. Her eyes were fixed on the slide, a red, inert monster. She saw the twisted metal, the loose bolts, the screaming children. The image was too vivid to be a simple fantasy. "Lily, Sam, come here." Jenna's voice came out shaky. Sam, in the sandbox, didn't even move. "Just one more minute, Jenna. We're building a castle." The smell of wet earth and the cold Atlantic breeze from the bay didn't calm Jenna's nerves. On the contrary, they seemed to amplify her anxiety. The premonition wasn't just visual, it was sensory. She could feel the vibration of the fall, the smell of metal and dust. With every laugh that came from the slide, a pang of agony pierced her. She had to act, but how could she convince two children of an invisible danger? "No, now! You can't play here anymore. Let's go home," she said, her voice a little firmer. Sam stood up, crossing his arms. "I don't want to go home. I want to go on the slide." Jenna felt a tear roll down her cheek. Desperation was a wave that threatened to drown her. She saw the reflection of her vision in every happy face climbing the toy's ladder. The premonition scream echoed in her ears, a cry for help, a cry of death. Jenna grabbed Lily and Sam's hands and pulled them hard away from the slide, almost dragging them. "No, you can't go there," she repeated, desperate. "No, no, no." The children, frightened by her reaction, began to cry. The scene caught the attention of other parents, who looked at her with curiosity and disapproval. Anger and dread mixed in Jenna's chest. She couldn't explain what she was feeling, and the children could only feel the abruptness. The sun, once welcoming, now seemed to have a cold, almost metallic shine. She looked at the slide one last time. A mother and her blonde-haired daughter, wearing a pink coat, were climbing the stairs. The same mother and daughter who were in her premonition. "No, don't go up," she screamed, her voice failing. But the woman didn't hear her. Jenna closed her eyes. A thunderous and terrifying sound of twisted metal and screams filled the park. The world stopped. When she opened her eyes, the slide was on the ground, a pile of iron and plastic. A sharp cry of despair spread through the park, but the mother and daughter, fortunately, were not at the top. They had stopped halfway up, watching the toy disintegrate. Jenna's heart felt like it was going to explode. She saved 2 lives, but death was still nearby. A shadow, which she hadn't noticed before, slinked behind the trees, watching them. It was a dense shadow that seemed to absorb the sunlight. It hid in the trees, but Jenna felt the cold that emanated from it, a promise that this was not over. The park was in chaos. Police and ambulance sirens cut through the air, and people huddled in shock. Jenna, Lily, and Sam stood still in the middle of the turmoil like statues. Lily clutched Jenna's coat tightly, and Sam held her hand, saying nothing. The babysitter, still in a state of shock, felt a deep cold that had nothing to do with the ocean breeze. She felt the presence of the shadow, lurking among the trees, a specter of death that now knew her name. What she had done was a deviation, an interference. And destiny, she knew, didn't like to be fooled. She had to get out of there. The shadow followed her, a dark cloud that moved furtively, gliding through the trunks of the oak trees. Jenna felt the need to hide, to protect herself. The coffee shop next to the park, called The Daily Grind, seemed like a safe harbor. Inside the cafe, the smell of fresh coffee and sweet bread contrasted brutally with the chaos outside. She sat at a table in the corner, the children nestled in her lap. The warm, yellow light of the cafe should have been comforting, but she felt the darkness outside, the presence of the shadow. She ordered 3 hot chocolates. One of the waiters, with a smile, brought the drinks on a tray. In an instant of distraction, he stumbled, and the tray of sweets he was carrying in his other hand fell from a considerable height. Jenna leaned down to grab a tissue for Lily, and the metal sweet stand with chocolate cookies fell exactly where her head had been just seconds before. The sound of metal hitting the floor and the shattering glass echoed in the cafe. The waiter, pale, looked at her in horror. Jenna, in turn, looked up and through the window saw the shadow in front of the coffee shop. A malicious smile curved on its dark face. Death had started its game. With every step, Jenna felt like she was walking on eggshells. The city of Boston, vibrant and full of life, seemed like a chessboard where she was the piece to be captured. The shadow followed her, a specter that materialized in the most unexpected places. She saw the shadow in the reflection of a window, in the gleam of a puddle on the sidewalk, in the outline of a person in the crowd. Sam was agitated. "Jenna, why are we walking so fast?" "I'm tired." Lily was in her lap, her little body trembling. "We're in a hurry, Sam. We need to get home," she replied, her voice tense. She couldn't risk going into another enclosed space, nor going home the usual way. She needed to change course, to confuse the shadow. They were crossing one of Boston's famous narrow streets. The screeching sound of a car's brakes made her stop abruptly. A bus, with a huge owl symbol, was stopped just inches from her. Her arms reflexively wrapped around the children to protect them. The driver looked at her, pale. "Didn't you see the bus?" Jenna was in shock, her heart beating uncontrollably. She hadn't felt the danger, hadn't seen it. The shadow had become smarter. It was disguising itself now. She looked at the street and saw her shadow, but darker, denser, reflected in the bus's gloss. It was one step behind her own shadow. Death was cornering her. The game was no longer about escaping an accident. It was about dodging a hunt. Jenna's desperation led her to an abandoned playground. The smell of rusted metal and damp earth was strong. Old swings creaked in the wind. The place was perfect for the shadow, an environment of sadness and neglect. And there, in the middle of the playground, the shadow materialized completely. It was tall and thin, in the shape of a human being, but without details, without features, just a black silhouette. The cold that emanated from it was unbearable. "You cannot escape," the shadow said, with a voice that sounded like an echo of the wind. "Destiny has been broken, and you will pay for it." The children were in a panic, hidden behind Jenna. The babysitter, however, had lost her fear. The dread had transformed into a sense of protection. She couldn't let the children die because of her. "I am the payment," she said, her voice firm. "They are not. They are innocent." They didn't know. The shadow hesitated. Death didn't like deals, but the babysitter was looking it in the eye. She knew the shadow only wanted what was due to it, and what was due to it was a life. The life that Jenna, through her premonition, had saved. Death was not a malevolent being. It was just an employee, an executor of the rules of the universe. Jenna stepped forward, her arms outstretched as if she were surrendering. "I will come with you," she said. "Just let me take care of them. And don't come back again." The The shadow nodded. The children watched her, not understanding. Jenna turned to the children, her eyes filled with tears. "I love you," she whispered, and then she closed her eyes. The autumn wind, now soft and welcoming, blew through the playground. The children, Lily and Sam, held on to each other, looking at Jenna's swing. It swung slowly, making a soft, rhythmic sound, but Jenna was no longer there. The shadow, the cold, the fear, it had all vanished. They were just there, alone, under the sunlight. A gentle breeze carried a red and golden autumn leaf, which landed softly on the playground floor, right between Sam's feet. He picked it up. He and Lily, holding hands, walked towards home, the sound of their small steps on the dirt floor the only noise. Jenna's swing in the playground continued to sway, an echo of a life that had been given to save others. The sun set, and the park fell silent. A silence that seemed like a promise that death, at least there, would not visit again.